Well, I think the beginning for me um, was that I always felt as though the world was very strange. The world was very strange. Even when I was 2 years old, 3 years old, I remember thinking how when I looked around at for example, my family's house, when I looked around at the places that we lived, everything felt strange. So I never felt comfortable as a person in society. So for me, art comes from discomfort. Art comes from being not at ease in your situation, and the process of making art is a process of making yourself more comfortable with the world by telling the truth, how you see reality. So, for example, I think that when I was in the hospital, when I was 3 years old, I had a serious disease, a pandemic in the United States called polio. And so I think that the process of several things come together for me. One is being the only child for 2 years, the oldest child. So when you're an only child for 2 years, I'm the oldest of 4 children. You have to, your life, your imagination, I think, is important in terms of how you think about things. So I think part of, for me, the entrance into art is being the only child, being very seriously ill when I was 3 years old in the hospital, and slowly then over the years, realizing that art was to me the most truthful way to pursue my life. I studied, I was very fortunate because I went to a very good college, for women, only for women, in 1964 to 1968. And during that period of time, I studied art history. So for me, to understand the challenge of pursuing art history for me was the means of access, was the means for me to understand that it could be very interesting to devote my life to somehow reflect my culture, be a mirror to my culture. So art history for me was the opening. No, I was not. I was not. My study of art history was very old art history. So it was really the Renaissance, the French, the Northern European Renaissance, expressionism of the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Russia. I was very influenced by expressionism, Edvard Munch, the Russian suprematism movement. So it was for me not so much looking at the art right then that was being made in the USA from 1964 to 68. And that's because I was sheltered. I didn't really know anything about the art world. I was only studying from a distance, So, so psychologically, for me, it was more about a gathering of feelings and attitudes and values. Values, I think, are very important in artistic practice. The value of saying what you think, being able to say exactly what you think, but in a way, what you think, what you're saying, it's actually a secret. It's a secret because visual art is not a sentence. It's not a classroom. It is actually a puzzle. A visual picture is a puzzle. So the viewer does not necessarily understand exactly the truth, so-called, that you are trying to say. They just get a feeling. And that kind of communication is very satisfying. The next step was reality. So college, my college from 1964 to 1968 was a sheltered, very academic type of education. I lived at the college and I completely focused on my studies, completely, 100%. Then after graduating in 1968, that ended and I had no money. So I had to go to live with my parents back in the Midwest in Illinois, near Chicago, Illinois. And I taught junior high school art. I taught in a school for very young people, ages 11 years, 12 years, 13 years old. And during that period of time, I said to myself, I have to get out of here. I applied to another school, we call it graduate school. And in 1971, 72, 1970, 71, and 72, I went to the University of Iowa in the Midwest, And that was an amazing, amazing experience. Amazing. And the reason it was so, such an explosion for me is that it was an explosion of desire for authenticity, to be really who you are. And the culture in that school for the art, the criticism and the moral structure was really about saying what you think, but not speaking the words. So with your images, you must be honest, whatever that is, you must be honest, but at the same time, you cannot explain it in words. So that process over 3 years was amazing to me, just totally amazing. So therapeutic, and I will never, ever forget it. I studied in Iowa. So from 1970 to 72, 69, 71, 72, those years I studied everything as much as I could. I did not specialize, no specialization of medium. So I studied filmmaking, I studied painting, I studied printmaking, and I was so lucky that I could do all these different media at that school. Then in 72, after finishing the school, I packed up everything, all of my work, with a friend, and we drove in a car to New York City. I moved into a loft in Soho, New York City, with my friend, and immediately just loved it. It was completely crazy. During that period of time, the art world was going through big changes because as you mentioned, the pop artists were very established. I was living right near where Leo Castelli and the pop artists were exhibiting their work in Soho. So the New York art scene had moved from what we call uptown to downtown to Soho. From Fifth Avenue, it had moved from Fifth Avenue down to Soho from the 60s to the 70s. And so from 1972, I started to work in a conceptual way. Oh, almost very few people, not too many people. No, I saw Andy Warhol, but I never met Andy Warhol. I met some of the pop artists at the gallery, at the Leo Castelli Gallery. But in general, they were already an older generation. Well, the process was very simple because it was philosophy and studying philosophy, reading philosophy, and studying the different types of conceptual art, because some conceptual art is very serious, like Donald Judd, like Saul LeWitt, but some conceptual art is actually very funny, and William Wegman. And so in 1972, 73, 74, I was going to the galleries and I was looking for a new feeling, not so serious, more lighthearted and more ironic, irony, humor, but reality. And so the work of John Baldessari was absolutely stunning to me. It was so important. This was his very early work that was crazy, just crazy experiments. And it was the use of photography as a way to show his conceptual ideas that got me interested in photography. So I never studied photography until I saw this conceptual work in the 70s, William Wegman's early work as well, their performances. Vito Acconci was another important person during that period of time. And there was another aspect of conceptual work that I was very impressed by, and that was the conceptual work that involves repetition. So some conceptual work is heavily involved in repetition, in perseverance. And for example, we could say that Saul LeWitt, some of his classic work is involved with repetition of mark making, repetition of things. Many minimal sculptors would show repetition, but not in an emotional, psychological way. They would show it as a philosophy of reality. So these two issues, these two elements in conceptual art, the use of photography in a new way to document conceptual ideas, and the use of repetition as a form of philosophy about the world and how in some ways nothing is ever quite the same. As Gertrude Stein said, you know, a rose is a rose. I started to be concerned about, first I started to be concerned about the relationship between the art object and the public. So the conceptual art for me was relatively not easy for the public to enter into, to experience. It was, as an artist, for me, my conceptual work was closed, was difficult, and was remote. So that led me to wonder, how can I take a picture that brings the viewer into the picture? The picture takes the viewer into the picture, rather than a picture that just is about a joke, let's say, or about a simple concept. And I decided in 1978, to become interested in commercial photography. Commercial photography in 1978 to me was a gold mine of ways to think about making a picture that had never really been very explored in the fine art world. Commercial photography had the kind of polish, had the kind of skill that was absent in photography, in fine art photography. Commercial photography had the kind of picture making that the Renaissance painters had, where you control the lighting, you control the shadow, you control the color, you control the composition within the rectangle. This kind of very methodical picture making in commercial photography, for me, was very inspiring after the conceptual work. So the conceptual work lasted from 1971, 72, 73, 74. Then it faded, and in came a kind of new interest in commercialism, questioning if commercialism is bad. Is it really bad? Is it contaminated? Is it fatally flawed? Or are there some things in commercialism that we in the fine arts could use to bring the viewer into our world, into the picture? Well, so I started with the food still lifes. In 1978, there is a series of food still lifes that show patterns, and they show vegetables, peas on a plate, orange on a box, and that is really the beginning for me of the very clear, in my mind, very clear use of the still photograph as a way to bring the viewer into, I guess, really into my heart in a way, because we live in a time of where everything is for everybody. The general sense of our culture of in the United States is for everything to be available to everybody. And so what I saw with being able to make the work that was in the photographs, I was more able to be to reveal myself. So the very first piece that I did was radioactive cats in 1980. And the thinking with that piece was new for me. So the thinking was, I'm going to take a picture, and I want in the picture for there to be one cat. Now, the technology that I was using involved very long shutter speeds on the camera, like 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and lots of apparatus, like the camera, the lighting, a lot of stuff all around the subject matter, because I wanted to take these very polished pictures. So how could I get a real cat into this picture? That would not be possible. So that's why I decided to actually sculpt a cat, to physically myself sculpt in plaster one cat that would then be in this picture of radioactive cats. So in 1979 to 1980, there's this kind of big jump between finding things to photograph, finding, buying, shopping, always looking outside of myself to find things, to bring these things into the studio, to then take a picture of them. Then in 1980, it was, no, I'm actually going to make what goes into the picture. I'm going to sculpt it myself. And that, in a way, because I'm sculpting it, is going to reveal more about me. Well, I'm a believer. I believe in teaching yourself during your whole lifetime. I really like to learn. I like to. I don't like to just say that I studied something. in school, and then I'm just going to do what that was. So ever since I left school, I've always been learning and looking at things. And when in 1980 I decided to start to do sculpture, I just felt as though, why not? Why not? So I had done some simple sculpture in school, but nothing elaborate. And so I used very simple direct media, plaster, chicken wire, and I started to make a sculpture of a cat as I saw it, you know. And the interesting part for that process, the interesting part was that the sculpture was terrible. The first sculpture was really a failure. I was crushed. I was crushed by myself because it was I was unable to realize with the plaster what I saw in my mind. I was unable to realize it. So that led me to then the very next day to be furious, very angry. And for me, anger is a powerful emotion, very powerful. I love it because it is fuel. It's like jet fuel for me. And so here I had failure with the first cat, and I decided to make another one, another cat. So I sculpted cat number 2. That one was still terrible, terrible. But then cat number 3. And with cat number 3, no, it's not very good, but maybe it's a little better. Cat number 4, maybe a little better. By cat number 5 or 6, now the cats were now becoming closer to my mind, closer to what I saw up here in terms of movement. Movement was very important because in still photography, I do believe you're always capturing movement of some kind. Even if you photograph, let's say, a brick wall, you're still photographing the molecules of movement. There's always a sort of a stopping of time with still photography. So if I didn't have movement in the picture with these sculptures, it would be a failure. So it was very important to keep going day after day. It was about 3 months every day making plaster cats. And I ended up on the floor with 25, 30 plaster cats on the floor. And I started to throw them out. I threw out some of the early plaster cats in the trash in New York City. And what I noticed is that some people took the cats out of the trash. And that was my first feeling of artistic success, real public enjoyment of my work. Without commerce, without money, without official New York Times review. That was my direct communication to my fellow human being that they saw my trash and they took my trash. So that was a feeling of success, real feeling of success, that I was on the right path. And so I continued to make cats up to a point. And the next question really is, if you're a conceptual artist and you're involved with a repetitive process, when do you stop? When do you stop? I mean, we have conceptual artists like Roman Opalka, who counted to 1,000,000 or whatever. Many conceptual artists who got very involved with repetition. And it does become a philosophical problem in terms of when to stop. And for me, the photograph solves the problem of stopping, because if I'm going to take a picture of my sculpture, only so many sculptures can fit in the photograph. So there are 25 sculptures in radioactive cats. So I stopped making the cats after a certain point when I felt that I had enough for the photograph. I think for me, it's the decision to no longer be a conceptual artist. I mean, I think a conceptual artist feels as though they have to, everything has to have a reason. And in my case, I decided to make these sculptures and to use all of these wonderful materials. For example, the wedding or the cocktail party, where I'm using all of these food materials, which if they were just an installation, they would not last. They would deteriorate, and it would never be quite as perfect. So for me, the photography is a way to preserve the perfection of that moment in my studio in, let's say, 1992, this perfect moment where everything came together, all fresh and all, true and perfect. After that, sometimes the sculpture part can exist as an installation, as an object. So for example, the cocktail party with those orange cheese doodles, right? That still exists now. And it's going to be shown as an installation in Texas in February. So it is in the collection of a museum in Texas. They own the installation. And because the cheese doodles were covered with epoxy resin and carefully taken care of, the installation still exists. With the wedding, because the wedding is strawberry jam, food, and marmalade, orange marmalade, many elements of that installation disappeared, so that no longer exists as an installation. I did try to make movies, actually, and I love movies. I love the cinema. I always loved the cinema, and I was thinking to go into film back in 1970, but I decided that what I really like is an object in the world. So film is not an object. Film, cinema is not an object. In 200 years from now, if people do not have a means to exhibit films, they will not be able to see films. They will not be able to see films. But if we don't have any technology, they will still be able to see my still photographs because they will exist as objects. So I'm still very convinced about the physical world, that it's very important, the physical world. And still photographs are a way to make an object out of a non-object, really, out of reality. Like behind you now, I see behind you, I see objects, and I don't need technology to allow me to see that or to experience that. I can stand in front of a still photograph with no technology and I can experience it. Just like I could experience a plaster cat, I can experience a painting, I can experience a sculpture. So my problem with video and cinema is that it requires this technological intervention for the human being to be able to perceive it. So I've stayed away from it as an art form. Oh, I love Antonioni. I studied, of course, the early Russian filmmakers in the 30s, around the time of the revolution and after. The French New Wave cinema, Godard, Truffaut, Fellini, but Fellini is a little over the top for me. I prefer Antonioni to Fellini, but that's pretty much it. I mean, I really enjoy the use of the imagination, environments, mystery. I love mystery. Mystery is very important. In the 80s, the art world was, I would say, very very active in the 80s. And it was a time of tremendous upheaval. And I think the most important element that I remember from 1980 was the feeling of that everything that had happened before was irrelevant. Everything that happened before was irrelevant, and that myself and the artists who were born in, we say, post-World War II, 1946, 47, 48, we all grew up with media. We grew up with the television. We grew up with advertising. And if you look at the work that was produced in the 80s, you can see that there's a very strong interest in using media, using photography, using film, using advertising in all the artists who were now well known from the 80s. So that to me was the most important feeling in the early 80s, was we're going to start all over again. And we use the word postmodern, postmodernism, postmodern. The term was used as a term of erasure, of erasing modernism, of erasing what modernism represented, which was a kind of religious devotion to art. And instead, with postmodernism, we were interested in introducing doubt, introducing irony into the art object. Became more of a speculative object, became more dynamic and less an object to be worshipped. Actually, right now, what I'm doing is I'm going back through the COVID. We should talk about the COVID epidemic. The COVID epidemic has had a big effect on me. And it's not necessarily a negative effect. It's actually given me a wonderful opportunity to be alone and to contemplate with a lot of time. It's given me so much time to be alone with myself and to have thoughts, to dream, to just to live, to breathe. I feel as though the COVID epidemic for me has allowed me to be in a society that has slowed down, and that society, because it's slowed down, I enjoy it more. I really enjoy it more. I enjoy life more. I think we were moving too fast. I think in the USA, our society was moving too fast. So I feel as though nature has given us a reckoning, a lesson here to slow down. That's how I'm feeling right now, is that I'm slowing down and enjoying life. Meaning, what does that mean? Enjoying life means to breathe and to know that I'm breathing, that I'm not constantly running, trying to fulfill deadlines. It's really a very special time. Of course, there's a tragic element. Of course, there is the loss of people who are getting ill and dying. That's terrible. But there's a bigger psychological, philosophical component to this, I believe. So I am going through my old work, and I'm actually finding in the old negatives moments before and after the picture that was taken. And I'm doing a new small series called Outtakes, so that, for example, with radioactive cats, I have now a new small image where there is the moment before the woman goes into the refrigerator. And I'm making a small print of that. I'm very excited about it because in a way it presents then two moments in the photo shoot instead of the one moment. And with outtakes, as a photographer, what I think we can do for ourselves is we can, unlike painters in a way, we can kind of go back and make it alive again, make something that you did in 1980, because it's a negative, it's still fresh and exciting. So, for example, les renards, right, that you said, the foxes, which I did for the Pompidou, actually, in 1989. That installation and that photograph, the people in the photograph are all dead. They're all dead now. But I'm able to go back and with those negatives, find those people alive in a different way in front of the camera, because the photo shoot involved me directing the people, do this, do that, sit down, look this way, look that way. So, for example, I have a new photograph for that piece for Les Renards, and that is called a different title. So for the moment, I'm doing these small pictures that are memories of the photo shoots back in the 80s, back in the 90s, and in the years 2000. And I hope to finish this series fairly soon. But it's been lovely to be able to do this, to bring my old work in some way back to life somewhat. And so that's what I've been doing. I love Photoshop. I love Photoshop. I'm very good at Photoshop. But to me, technology has to be at the service of us, of people. There's no point in just pure fantasy, pure invention without a psychological and a physical relationship to our life as creatures, as animals, our life as animals. So my opinion is that I do use Photoshop. I use it, but I only use it to make the picture look more real than it actually looks. So I only use it to get rid of dust, to get rid of spots or imperfections. Still, the moment of the capture, the moment of the camera, the object in front of it, and me taking the picture, and all of the lighting and everything else, the event itself, to me, that's still the critical part of the truth of the work. I think always art has to be somehow about truth. And that doesn't mean that, there are artists for whom their pictures are completely invented, but that's their truth. For me, the truth is in this kind of the limits of our physical existence, which is really ultimately very tragic, that physically we have to die, that physically we get old, that there's physical suffering, that our limits in the world are like very, I think, in a way, tragic. But at the same time, I feel as though if I look at it from the point of view of postmodernism, I can actually sit back, and while there's tragedy, if I look at it and I bring into it irony and humor, then I feel more satisfied. So if you think about the history of society's artworks, that there's either humor and comedy or tragedy, these are the two basic ways of thinking about life. I'm trying to combine both into one. So take something like Revenge of the Goldfish, which has the orange fish. So that picture could be seen as very funny or very frightening, very scary. Maybe the fish are going to eat the young boy sitting in the bed, or it could be seen as very funny because you're a fish and you're going to eat the boy in the bed. So it's a question of who do you identify with in my work? Do you identify with the animal, or do you identify with the person in the picture? No, everything is actually what was in front of the camera. Right. No, just everything is in front of the camera. On wire. They're hanging on wire. Well, actually, Olga, if you look carefully at Les Jeux de Renard, you should see some wires. It's a very big problem. I totally agree. It's very important that we do not turn ourselves into machines. It's very important that we do not turn ourselves into machines. And I find that the trouble with the Photoshop is that you are sitting in front of the computer all the time. And why am I an artist? Why? I mean, it's a crazy life. I'm an artist. It's very clear to me. I'm an artist because I want to live my life to the fullest, but on my terms, not on society's terms, but on my terms. And so if I'm sitting in front of a computer all the time, I feel as though I'm obeying society. This is what society has us all doing now, is sitting in front of the computer. So I always rebel against this kind of thing that I see, behavior. But I think it's very important to react against it. And I feel that we are, I feel there is that feeling, reacting against it. And I know that when I did, in 1981, when I did Revenge of the Goldfish, now I sat and I handmade with my own hands each fish that's in that picture. Each fish, chaque poisson that is in that picture is individual, made by me in clay, one day at a time, 132 days. Every day, go to the studio, work on the fish, let the clay dry. Every day, very simple, very humble, work. And as I was doing the work and repeating the gestures and working, I knew that in the end, when people looked at the picture, Revenge of the Goldfish, the first thing they would see or think is that it was made by Photoshop. Because they would see all these fish, they look similar, so it must be the same fish, because who in their right mind would make all of these fish and do all of that? Who would invest all that time and energy? And I knew that a lot of people who would see it small, see the picture small, would see all that repetition, and they would think that it was done digitally. That was in 1981. I knew that that was going to be a way in which people understood my work. And that was very deliberate on my part. I mean, I knew that that was a problem. And that's one of the reasons that I exhibited the installations starting in 1980 and 81 at Castelli Gallery. I showed all of those fish in the gallery.